we become a significant economic enabler, we definitely want to be Canada's best gateway airport.
Good afternoon. My name's Stephen McNeil. I'm Strategic Business Advisor at the law firm Cox Palmer. We're doing conversations with important Atlantic Canadians who are helping drive our economy.
We're pretty excited for what the future holds and very optimistic, actually. We've got a wonderful province that's growing and some great objectives that the province itself has, and we want to be part of that. We want to be here to support that growth.
And help drive Atlantic Canada. Today, joining me is Joyce Carter, who is President and CEO of the Halifax Stanfield International Airport. Joyce, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. Great to be here.
Yeah, you have 25 years. Did you think the run would last that long?
I did not. So I am in my 25th anniversary at Halifax Stanfield and 11 years as president and CEO. And when I first joined, I thought maybe I would have a 5-year run. So I was intrigued by this organization called the Halifax International Airport Authority. And I was probably like many people at the time that didn't really think about who ran the airport. And so it just seemed like a great fit at the time. And I thought I'd give it 5 years. And here I am 25 years later.
It's been obviously I'm a big believer in the economic benefit of the airport and quite frankly of all of our transportation infrastructure. But when you first went to the airport, could you envision what is today's Stanfield International Airport?
I could not have. The journey has been amazing. And so, for a little bit of context, back in 2000, this is when Halifax International Airport Authority began to run Halifax Stanfield under a long-term lease from Transport Canada. We were processing under 3 million passengers, and our economic impact at the time was under $2 billion. And when you look at today, those numbers have more than doubled. We've become a significant economic enabler for the province. And when I think back to that person that took the, sort of venture 25 years ago, I frankly had no idea what we could become. And so it's been an incredible journey.
So you've had, of those 25, 11 you've been president and CEO.
That's right.
What has been the most surprising aspect of that 11 years?
So when I came into the role 11 years ago, it was at a time, and you'll probably remember this well, it was at a time when the One Nova Scotia report had just been issued. The Ray Ivany Commission, you may remember well, had issued its recommendations around how we can turn Nova Scotia around. And as a new CEO, I got the report and I read it. And I remember talking to the team about how we as an organization, let's read it, and how we as an organization may be able to contribute to some of the recommendations that were in there. And as we read them, it became very obvious that there were clear recommendations that we could contribute towards, but as well, ones that we felt quite strongly that the province probably couldn't achieve without our help. And so we started on this plan to look at those objectives, and in particular around economic development and growth, around tourism, around trade, immigration, foreign direct investment. What can we do to help the province of Nova Scotia achieve these objectives?
That report almost was a turning point in lots of ways, as much, and I say to people, as much for the way we looked at things. And the fact that government didn't say it, the fact that it was being said by a group of Nova Scotians, and Ray was the chair of that board, it challenged all of us to think about things in a different way. And I think if you were to ask most Nova Scotians to describe the airport, they would describe it as, okay, I'll go there to get on a flight to go where I'm going to visit, not looking at the complexity of what happens there on a day-to-day basis and the importance of it beyond just moving people, but our connectivity to the world and opening up Atlantic Canada.
Right. So most of you would think about the airport as a place you go to get your leisure trip, as you said.
Yeah.
So I'm going away to visit family and friends or to take a leisure vacation, and I need the airport to do that. And really, one of the early things I think about is the impact that the airport has on tourism. And so one of the goals was to double tourism. And I remember thinking, how can we contribute to that? What role do we play in tourism today as an economic generator? And how can we help those revenues be double? And when you think about a traveler by air versus other modes of transportation, they stay twice as long in the province and they spend twice as much. And so we were in markets trying to get services from a destination perspective and a tourism perspective that weren't necessarily at the time aligned with the work that was being done by the province. So that's the first thing we did, is say, okay, we need to work together. And so you're absolutely right. It is so much more than a place where you go simply to leave. But when you think about those that are coming to Nova Scotia, from a tourism perspective, it is one of the most sought-after places in the world. And so what role can Halifax Stanfield play with the province of Nova Scotia, the tourism agencies as well, to make sure that we have the services in place to allow the tourists who want to come to Nova Scotia to be here? And so we took upon ourselves a strategy as it related to that. And, that's just one example of how it drove the tourism economy significantly in the years that followed.
When I introduced you as the president and CEO of Halifax Stanfield International Airport. And I always used to like to say when I was traveling, you were Atlantic Canada's international airport. Now, some of your sister organizations in other provinces may not want me to emphasize that, but I say that because we're talking about not just the tourism opportunity, but commercial and goods. It's an opportunity for us to express to the world that we have an entry point into Canada.
Right. And so we're a hub.
Right.
We're a hub to the region.
And without it, I always just say people will wave to us as they're flying to Toronto. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of that, of being able to get whether a flight to stop in Nova Scotia for commercial purposes, for whether it's tourism or, quite frankly, people doing business in other parts of the world?
Right. So people may say, what's the benefit of having Halifax as a hub? And I can tell you this, is that when you have nonstop services into destinations to and from Halifax, those services will be used far more than services that have to connect over one destination. I can also tell you that our region, so you mentioned Atlantic Canada, all of Atlantic Canada, our population is such that in order to sustain for the summer season and then as well year-round these services, we need to have good connectivity. So when you get a flight, I'm going to make up an example now, but when you get a flight to Europe, say to Paris, that flight doesn't just prove itself to the airlines on the traffic that's originating and departing in Halifax, it also does so on the connectivity to that flight. And so whether you're connecting from somewhere in the U.S. over Halifax, then on to Paris, or elsewhere in Canada over Halifax and then on to Paris and vice versa, that flight then becomes sustainable for the carriers with that connecting traffic. What it also does for Nova Scotians is it gives them an additional destination, not only to Paris, but say to the connection beyond that. So into the U.S., maybe to the New York market, or elsewhere in Canada, perhaps on to a destination west. And so the real sweet spot is when that connecting service from a passenger basis sustains itself, but as well from a cargo basis. And I know we haven't talked about cargo, but I know we will.
No, but yeah, we'll come back to that because I think there's an important piece to that. But I also want to acknowledge and recognize that the Council of Premiers in Atlantic Canada more recently put together a fund to be the impetus to help grow the routes within side of Atlantic Canada, whether it's the Deer Lake or St. John or...
Exactly. So in addition to attracting connectivity to the U.S. and the rest of Canada, it is critically important that we have connectivity within Atlantic Canada, so intra-regional. That service that we had prior to the pandemic in 2020 that we haven't been able to recover to the extent we had. And so those flights are not only fed by destinations around Canada, but as well in Atlantic Canada. And there's O&D traffic there as well. So there's origin and destination traffic within Atlantic Canada for business purposes mostly that want to be able to go to Charlottetown, to go to St. John's, to go to Fredericton for the day for a meeting, to go to Sydney. And so I applaud the premiers for working together through the Council of Atlantic Premiers. This is an issue that we, as all the airports collaboratively in Atlantic Canada, have been working with them on to issue an RFP to the carriers to say, does anyone want to, respond to this service? And then to reach an agreement with PAL to provide that service. And that's scheduled to start in 2026. And what that does is that boosts the connectivity within Atlantic Canada, both for those who need to do the day trips, but as well, it supports the beyond traffic to the destinations, similar to what I just mentioned.
Well, I too want to give them a shout out. Having sat at that table, I know it's not always easy for sister provinces to potentially join with others, but having the vision to realize how important it is to use this international asset that we have to be able to build out those regional and community flights, and that does take a bit of courage on behalf of the people sitting at the table who don't represent the international airport. So I do want to congratulate them for recognizing that. And isn't it great that PAL is going to take that on?
Yeah. One of our own carriers certainly does some flying in the region now, a lot of flying, but they are very motivated to make this work. They know the region well, they know what it's going to take, and so we're quite excited to continue our relationship with them in this capacity. And I agree, it's not easy. The federal government is part of that as well through ACOA, so it's not easy to bring all those parties together to say, okay, and it's a 3-year pilot. So let's give this a chance to get restarted. It's really the envy of the airports across the country to see that we could do this within Atlantic Canada. We're unique in that sense, right? We work together, especially when we need to on initiatives such as this.
And when we do it, we all rise. Like the economic benefit is felt, across the region. I'll give you, one example is we're talking about potentially regional flights. But even when we look at cargo in a more regional basis, I used to say we're not each other's customer. Our customers are out in the world. We have to figure out how to get there. If we can continue to build that regional connectivity, that will also help in that global export opportunity.
It will. And so it might be a surprise to some to know that it is an extremely competitive business, air service development, both passenger and cargo. Those aircraft and the crews that fly them can go anywhere in the world. They don't need to come to Halifax. And so being able to show the carriers that this is the best place to place these aircraft at that time is part of the business case that supports the intra-regional service. But as well, the cargo capacity is a really important part of that. So when you think about cargo and you think about the exports out of Halifax Stanfield, air is the best way to export any high-value perishable goods. And one product that we have right here in Nova Scotia that is consumed around the world is our live lobster. And so looking at the markets that we're in today and ensuring that that product, really, this is where regional economic development comes from, because that product is coming from rural Nova Scotia and rural areas in Atlantic Canada to then be lifted by air out of our air cargo logistics park at Halifax Stanfield to markets around the world. And so we must never lose sight of the long-term objective to grow for high-value perishable goods, the export out of Halifax Stanfield.
Kudos to you when you came in, and as well as your board, at the beginning of your journey, 11 years, realizing cargo was an important piece. At that time, much of live lobster was heading to Boston. The investment you made in flights, but more importantly in the runways, to be able to take on like Korean Air, for example, which carries a lot of lobster out of here.
And has been in the market for 10 years. So they just celebrated their 10th anniversary.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And so you're right, Stephen, when you think about the investments, the infrastructure investments that are required to stay in the global game. And we couldn't have done any of this without the support of the provincial and federal government, is the extension of our runway, right, to allow us to have the largest aircraft land here, cargo airplanes, and then the build-out of our air cargo logistics park. Those were visions that we had even coming into the time of the pandemic and looking at, our very limited capital resources and where are we going to place those resources, is doing it in infrastructure, and infrastructure that is going to sustain, the event we're in, whatever it is, be it a pandemic, be it 9/11, be it the tariff situation. Making the investments in the infrastructure at the time will allow us to grow long term. And so the vision and, the leadership I have on my team has been incredible in that regard. And it's been really important to not, one thing I've learned about resilience in this business is to not let that moment, and that moment may last for a few years, kind of define you long term. So,
well, and it's interesting. Your team deserves a lot of credit, and as I say, the board as well, of having that, because that's a big investment that, quite frankly, most of us don't understand or see. Planes come and go, and we get on them, and we don't think about that at all. I know from my previous life the importance of getting cargo out of here, but that investment mattered because it's not like you can walk in and see it.
No, the investment matters, right? So Halifax is an optional stop for a cargo plane, to be frank. And so we have to make it as easy as possible for them to come here and take our great products to market. We contend with things we can't control, like weather, but there are things that we can control. And so making their turnaround time and the journey and the processing of that cargo through the logistics park, through a refrigerated facility, until it gets on the aircraft has been incredibly important. And so, I would applaud our organization and our board and our team for the insight and the government long term to see the investments that were needed to be made.
Talking a little bit about the partnerships and your board, and you just mentioned the logistic park. Mm-hmm. Talk about the private sector piece to that.
Yeah, so for sure, we're a facilitator, right? So we provide the runways and the taxiways, and in some cases, for sure, the land, but in some cases, the building or parts of the building. But we couldn't do it without the private sector, right? Without the organizations behind the operations. So we have some wonderful tenants at Halifax Stanfield that are deeply committed not only to the community, but are absolutely committed to their organizations and to their exporters. And they make it work. It's sometimes not easy, but they definitely make it work. And they work hard to make sure they're getting the right product to the right markets at the right time. And so much more work to be done, so much more opportunity, right? So, one of the things I will mention that the market has shifted somewhat back and forth through the pandemic is what we call freighter capacity. So the largest aircraft you have in the world being able to fill up with 100-ton of live lobster, but as well to belly capacity. So we recently opened our new international connections facility. This is a passenger connections facility that allows you as a passenger to connect quickly through Halifax Stanfield without having to reclaim your bags or go through security screening twice. But it also allows us to process the largest passenger aircraft that we haven't been processing in the past, and that gives us the advantage of being able to carry cargo in the belly of those aircraft. So right now, we have service into Europe, a market that I know the province is interested in increasing exports, and our international connections facility with service like we have to Frankfurt with Discover Airlines. We had this summer to Zurich with Edelweiss, allows us to put up to 10 ton of live lobster perishable cargo in the belly of that aircraft. 10 turns of that aircraft is equivalent to one freighter. So it doesn't take long to then see the tremendous value as well of being able to move cargo in belly of aircraft. The smaller the aircraft, the harder it is to do that. So we again, and that was foresight through the pandemic to stay focused on our international connections facility, to continue with the investment in that, and we're pleased that it's opening this year. Has opened softly, but is officially opening later this year.
And it's amazing. We kind of take for granted the quality of the product that we have in the region, and that's not just live lobster. It's an important part of what we're doing in Asia, but largest home of the wild blueberry produced in the world. Product that we can move in and out, the agri-food business that is helpful to us. So finding these more opportunities to be able to get that product into the global marketplace, just in many cases, I don't want to say this to be, it's really important to rural communities. many of those products end up coming, particularly these perishable ones, come from a rural community, and it's critical that we can be able to do that here. I was tired of traveling and hearing about Boston lobster.
When you were in another country, and it actually came from Halifax because it drove to Boston and then flew.
So
Totally.
So it's that I can't help but support in the idea of how important this is, and part of it allows us to tell our own regional story in a much better way through what's moving.
Yeah, the cargo story. You're absolutely right. Almost entirely is a rural story of economic development in Nova Scotia. As an airport, shipping cargo, the plane comes and the plane leaves. I often say we don't have the benefit of the passenger to then go through the terminal building to get a coffee, to, park. We get that one chance when it lands to properly load it with cargo, and off it goes. And so it is an incredible economic generator. While it's a small piece of revenue for the airport itself, basically a landing fee, it is an incredible economic generator for the province of Nova Scotia, in particular the rural areas. So this is why we work so hard to ensure that those flights are sustainable.
I hear the phrase game changer a lot for people being used, and I'm always afraid to use it. But it was a significant contribution to growing the export opportunity here in Atlantic Canada, particularly into the Asia market. Without that investment that most of us wouldn't have seen in the runways, and now in order to build what's happening in the European market, as you're describing now, the passenger plane with the bigger bellies to be able to take freight is huge for us. And not only does it makes the business case for the airport stronger, but it helps grow our regional economy.
Yeah. I remember when the first sort of building on site to process cargo opened, and one of my team members, I wasn't even in my CEO role yet, saying that's going to be the first of many, and me wondering whether that was going to be true. And when I look at where it's at today, you're absolutely right. It is a game changer for our province and can continue to be so. And not to put aside the importance of the passenger services, so important. It's just finding that right mix of the cargo, the belly cargo, the passenger service, getting people where they want to be, when they want to be, and then obviously the other parts, as I mentioned, the tourism, right. Immigration, right? We're often the first place when an immigrant comes to Canada, the first place that they step foot in Canada, Nova Scotia for sure, in Canada oftentimes, and ensuring that we have the connectivity for them so they can go back and see their family and their family can come see them, but as well trying to create this sense of place for folks who are coming to Canada and Nova Scotia for the first time to be able to see through Halifax Stanfield, what we represent as a region.
One of the things as an Atlantic Canadian, someone who uses the airport, I love the ability to be able to clear customs going into the U.S. from Halifax. As a matter of fact, I often look for a flight that will allow me to clear customs here. I'm being a bit selfish talking about my experience, but tell me a little bit about how important that is, and particularly for European travel who land here as they're moving through our airport. You alluded to it a little bit, but as this whole anxiety about what's going on with the U.S., this too shall pass. We need to make sure that the things that are working and have worked for us are still here.
Exactly. So one of the most important things we have in Halifax is U.S. preclearance. This is a facility that allows you to clear U.S. customs while you're still in Canada. And so it is not selfish for you to say that you like to take those nonstop flights, because if for some reason you're not going to be cleared, it is so much better to do that in your own country than to find that out when you're in the country that you're going to. So you pre-clear here, and then you're considered a domestic passenger by the U.S. Officials. And so it is an incredibly important strategic advantage to us, given our proximity to the U.S. and the nonstop flights that we have. Our traffic, it often surprises folks when I say quarter 3 of 2024 is up 15% from quarter 3 of 2025 is up from 2024, 15%. So our U.S. Traffic is actually doing very well this year. We have a beautiful tourism product, as I mentioned, so the inbound part of that is extremely important. But the other thing that a lot of folks don't recognize that U.S. preclearance allows you as an airport operator to do is it really opens up when you're doing business development for these very movable assets that I mentioned earlier. It opens up any airport in the U.S. to you to allow that aircraft to go into. And so you don't need to only look at services that are going to take you into an airport that has a U.S. customs facility. So you can connect anywhere from that point. And once you're there, because you don't have to go through that process, you can quickly then connect on. And so from an outbound perspective, it's great. It's absolutely great for the residents of Nova Scotia and all of Atlantic Canada. From an inbound perspective, it also helps our hub strategy. So when I mentioned earlier the flights that allow you to then connect on into Europe, we can have somebody come in on a flight from the U.S. today, connect through our hub facility, and then go on to Europe. And that helps sustain that flight to Europe. Every passenger counts in today's market. And so that's when the hub itself works really well, when you get that connectivity both ways from Europe over Halifax, then perhaps on to the U.S., or perhaps on to Canada, or stay here in our beautiful region, as many do, and same going the other way. So you're right, this too will pass, and certainly it is really important that we keep our view on the long game and ensure that we do everything we can to maintain preclearance here in Halifax. I have no worry of it going away, but certainly my main concern is that we keep it as a strategic asset here for our community.
It's a huge economic asset for the province, and for those of us who live here, it seems like a big entity. But if you travel any amount, there's an intimacy to the airport.
There is.
So when you're coming inbound, I'm imagining the anxiety must be a lot less landing in Halifax than in some of our larger major places, either in Canada or the U.S.
It is, absolutely. We want, and people like to use our facility versus connecting over another airport, then onto the U.S., because you're clearing customs out in those airports, either this airport in the U.S. or perhaps even another airport in Canada. So very much like you say, we encourage people to take the nonstop flights out of Halifax. That helps sustain those flights as well. No different than our European or our Canadian flights. It's all about the right mix of passengers and cargo on those flights.
You mentioned earlier, I mean, in many cases, you're the first spot that newcomers see. Our immigration numbers have been growing steadily, but they've been through the roof since the pandemic.
So we used to call ourselves, the modern Pier 21. Right? When you're coming to Halifax now.
That's a great,
yeah.
It's a reality. That's what it is, yeah.
So you are coming through the airport, and, what you see is going to be your first kind of indication of what Nova Scotia is going to be like. And so we've created a thematic plan. I say that to folks, and I often get, what's a thematic plan? And a thematic plan is taking a look at our facility from end to end and ensuring that it is themed properly with what, and this was a bunch of consultation to get it, it's themed properly with what we want our community to see as they arrive. And so this plan, it's not that we're going to rebuild the whole terminal building, because obviously we have to do this in a very measured way. But as we do developments within the terminal building, you're going to see the theming of that plan start to come out. And so the best example I can give you is our new International Connections facility that I just mentioned. It will have a really well thought out and consulted with the community Indigenous component to it. And so if you're coming into Halifax and that's the first place you're coming through, you are going to see that history in this new facility. And you'll see those changes. Some of it will be subtle, changes in colors through the terminal building as we do developments. But we very much want to have people feel that they've got a sense of place when they arrive, that they understand Halifax is so much, a big part of it is our beautiful lobster and our beaches, but so much more than that. And so we want to ensure that we're properly reflecting the history of Nova Scotia and doing that in a very thoughtful way. So, yeah, we're excited about that. So that's just starting to roll out.
We've been talking a little bit about the past. what do you see over the hill? What do you see as the next direction?
Definitely, it's so funny because as we're developing this new plan, I will be very surprised if the work that we're doing in the space of sustainability, connectivity, innovation, customer excellence, the passenger journey being as seamless as it possibly can be, the economic development and growth in cargo doesn't continue and multiply from what it is today. We definitely want to be Canada's best gateway airport. And so this is our vision, all being reviewed now. But I just know that with the work of our partners and all levels of government and our community stakeholders, that we will continue the great journey we're on. If you see it, you can be it, is what they often say, right? So yeah, we're pretty excited for what the future holds, and very optimistic, actually. We've got a wonderful province that's growing and some great objectives that the province itself has, and we want to be part of that. We want to be here to support that growth.
And help drive Atlantic Canada. Because I think it's in not only for your sustainability, but I think for our region's sustainability, there has to be an Atlantic Canada focus. And that's kind of part of what this conversation that we're trying to have as a firm is about. What is happening in Atlantic Canada. Obviously, Cox Palmer's an Atlantic Canada law firm. We have offices in every province. To trying to get people to think regionally and not just governments, but organizations. And part of that is telling this story. And there's lots of great stories, and you're one of them. So I want to thank you for coming today. And it sounds like you're well on your way of fulfilling that, what I said when you see over the hill, by the recognition that you've already received as an airport.
Yeah, the most connected internationally in North America. Like, we're not even just talking Canada exactly. So, carbon accreditation level 3, customer experience level 2. And so we are well on our way to doing even bigger and greater and better things with the right people.
Well, I should have asked you this at the very beginning. 11 years ago, how many women were leading airports?
So I tracked this actually. In Canada, we have what we call the Tier 1 airports, which is the 8th largest airports in Canada, and Halifax is one of those. And I was the only one. So today, there's 4.
Wow.
4 out of 8. So that is a
congratulations on being a trailblazer.
I'm telling you, that's a pretty substantial change. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, it must be nice to go to a meeting now of your colleagues and realize
not the only woman. Yes, exactly. It's changed the conversation, I have to tell you. So it's funny. I was just chatting with someone about that at lunch today, and she said to me, "You'll know who that is. Does it have to be 3 to change the conversation?" We were talking about something totally different, but that's what they say. It has to be 3. So now we're 4 out of 8.
But it does change the conversation, and I think it's part of your story, and it's part of the airport story.
It is,
and I think it's part of how the airport looks.
Thank you.
How I used to say in boardrooms that I was in, I think I have a pretty good understanding what my brothers think.
Right.
I need someone in the room who's going to tell me what my sisters think.
Right.
I see my son in a lot of boardrooms. I don't necessarily see someone representing my daughter in these boardrooms, which means the conversation is as rich as it's full.
Yeah.
And it's not reflective of who we are.
Right.
So kudos to you.
And to our board, actually, that comes right from the top, right? Yeah. So as an organization, we definitely have a great representation of women leaders, and I couldn't be more proud of them.
Thank you, Joyce. I really appreciate this. I can't wait to go now because for people who are going to listen to this, my aunt knows Joyce quite well, so I'm going to go home and call my Aunt Sally to make sure that I tell her we had a great conversation, promote at the airport. But we also mentioned that Joyce is from Cape Breton. I don't want to forget that.
We must not forget that. She will not let you forget that. And she's going to be 90, so wish her a happy birthday.
I will. I'll see her in a few weeks. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank all of you who have tuned in to this episode of What's Happening in Atlantic Canada, brought to you by Cox Palmer. And I look forward to chatting with you soon.